Okay, so just I would like to on this side. Yes, okay. So, well, just an introduction first. I'm Roberto, and I'm a guide of Pompeii, but first I'm an archaeologist, and I specialize in classic archaeology. That means that I studied at the university Greek and Roman archaeology. So basically, I'm focused more from the classic time of these two ancient civilizations, Greeks and Romans. I live in Italy, in South Italy, in a city called Salerno. Salerno is next to the Amalfi Coast in Campania region. I don't know now if you have more or less the idea where is Campania. So Campania is a region of Italy, let's say a sort of state as the United States, and the capital is Napoli, probably you know also as a Naples. So Salerno is the second biggest city of the region after Napoli. And between Napoli and Salerno, there are a lot of beautiful places to visit. For example, the famous archaeological site, Pompeii, Herculaneum, but also we have other beautiful places next to the coast, to the shore, as for example, the famous Amalfi Coast or the Sorrento Coast, Capri Island, for example, is another very famous place of my region. As archaeologist, I usually work in Campania, but I work and traveled all around the Mediterranean Sea. I worked in southern France, in Greece, in different islands, Greek islands, always for classic archaeology and basically Greek archaeology. Here in Campania, I work in Paestum, that is another archaeological site from the Greek time, and in Pompeii. So now about Pompeii, something very quick about the history of this area. I told you where it's located, so south of Italy, the region that nowadays is called Campania, south of Naples, there was this city in the Roman time called Pompeii. But important to remember that Pompeii that we know and we will see today is the Pompeii of the Roman time. But Pompeii was founded before the Romans. So by different civilizations that lived together in this area from the end of the 7th century before Christ. As archaeologists, we have found different tracks of these civilizations. So we realized that before the Romans, here in this area, lived the Etruscans, another Italian civilization that we know better in Tuscany, up in the north of Italy. Greeks that came from Greece, from Achaia, that was a region, the mainland of Greece, and other local people called Oscans that live in few small villages around the Vesuvius. So basically, these are the first civilizations that we have found tracks in the area of Pompeii. But the archaeological site that we will investigate every day, in particular, is the sites of Pompeii, is the city from the time of the Romans. The Romans arrived here in the South Italy from the beginning of the 3rd century before Christ. And when the Romans arrived here, the Romans started, they conquered, basically, the Roman conquered all this area, and then they built the buildings that always characterize Roman cities. Like, for example, amphitheater, the theater, the baths, the thermal baths, and also the main square, called in Latin Forum. Okay, that is this one. Then all this area the Romans live basically here for more than 300 years. Romans live in Pompeii, but everything stopped when there was the famous eruption of the volcano Vesuvius. The volcano that buried and destroyed the city in the 79 AD. Okay? So after that, all the city was completely buried and was completely forgotten till the beginning of the 18th century. So Pompeii was buried for about 17 centuries. And then, basically by accident, like happened always for the important archaeological discovery, we found the first ruins of Pompeii, and then they started the excavation. Exactly the date of the discovery of Pompeii was 1848. So, well, I would like now to, well, this is the Pompeii map, so a map of this archaeological site. It's important to know that we know all the perimeter of the defensive walls of the city. And inside, this is all the areas that we have excavated. What is interesting, that in about 300 years of excavations, we have discovered only the 60% of the city. That means that there is another 40% underneath the layers of the eruption of the 79. So still nowadays, there are excavations ongoing to find new things. So we can start our tour today visiting the area of the amphitheater. That is basically, I will show you this video with thanks of Google Street, and that is inside the archaeological area. That was the one of the entrance of the archaeological site called the Porta Anfiteatro, so the amphitheater gate. So we can move along this path. So basically, from here, we can see something interesting. For example, you can recognize also here part of the defensive walls of the city. Remember that the Romans conquered the city, but the defensive walls were built by the previous civilization. When the Roman arrived here, the Roman didn't need defensive walls. So the Roman basically reused the defensive walls, sometimes to build on top storage rooms for their shops, sometimes also to build terraces for their houses. Because of course, the Roman conquered everything, so they didn't need a defensive wall. So now basically we will move inside, we are moving inside the archaeological site of Pompeii in an area that is characterized by two important public buildings. This one is the external wall of the gymnasium. So the public gymnasium where the young Romans practice different sports, like, for example, running, sort of wrestling, and also we have found inside the gymnasium a huge pool that was used for, was a swimming pool, basically. This one instead, in front of us, you can see all the arches, original, remember original, that is a perfect preserve, the situation in Pompeii, thanks to the catastrophic event that was the eruption. There is the amphitheater. And now we can move inside the amphitheater through one of the corridors that was used by the gladiators or the exotical animals. What is interesting is this inscription, that's a replica. The original of this inscription is in the Archaeological Museum of Napoli, because remember that all the most important frescoes, mosaics, are located inside the Archaeological Museum. So we remove from Pompeii to the museum, because of course imagine that a lot of things like paintings, beautiful mosaic floors are better preserved inside the museum, respect from the open air space here. And now we can move inside the amphitheater. Basically inside the arena. That is the arena where there were the battles, the fighting between gladiators and exotical animals. I don't know if have you been in Italy before, if have you been in Pompeii before, but probably you know that in Italy, in particular in the capital of Italy, in Rome, there is one of the most famous buildings of the ancient time, of the Roman time, that is the Colosseum. The Colosseum is the biggest amphitheater of the ancient time, of the Roman time. What it is interesting that the amphitheater of Pompeii is older than the Colosseum. So imagine that the Colosseum was built in the around the 80 AD, so about the time of the disruption of Pompeii. So basically, the amphitheater of Pompeii is 160 years older than the Colosseum of Rome. Of course, it's also smaller than the Colosseum of Rome. To understand a bit better the sites, the different sites, imagine that the seats of the amphitheater of Pompeii are about 20,000 seats. So not too bad, quite a big size. But instead, the seats of the Colosseum in Rome are about 80,000 seats. So the Colosseum in Rome is 4 times bigger than this one. Just something that important to know, just an interesting thing, that this is part of the original seats. We have just a few original block in rocks because during the first time of excavation, imagine that Italy was not unified, but there was the kingdom of the South Italy, the kingdom of Napoli. And at that time, the kings, the Bourbon family from Spanish roots, when they discovered Pompeii, they also reused part of the material to build the royal palace in Napoli or different churches in other city of the kingdom. But what is interesting that the seats in all the amphitheater, in all the Roman time, were always divided, and the low rows were used for the, let's say, the VIP of that time. So wealthy merchants, politicians, that's it over there. And in fact, sometimes we can read in Pompeii on the top of this low wall in stone, carved in the rocks, the family names of these important citizens of Pompeii. Unfortunately, it's not possible to see here. So when you move to Pompeii, you will see directly in situ these names. Remember that this is just these tunnels were used by the gladiators and the exotic animals. Instead, usually the audience enter from these like just to show, yeah, exactly from these steps, from this staircase, they move up to their seats. Okay, just a focus about the gladiators and the shows of gladiators. Imagine that these shows were used as a propaganda to show to the different citizens of the Roman Empire how strong was the empire, because the battles, the shows of gladiators was used to recreate also the battles that Roman army did and the victory that the Roman army had with several and different other civilizations. Okay, so it was like a sort of recreation to recreate the war event of the Roman Empire. Gladiators were always slaves, and in fact, basically slaves that were like, let's say, soldiers of enemy's army that were under the control of the Roman, conquered by the Roman, and then the Roman used these slaves for different use, but also as a gladiator for the shows. Gladiators, shows of the gladiators were used also because are famous now the battles between gladiators and exotical animals, because again was another way to show how spread was now the power and the control of the Roman Empire all around the Mediterranean, also in North Africa, in Near East, Middle East. So from these places, they just put some exotical animals to show as a great show, basically. What that I would like to show now are some of the artifacts that we have found in Pompeii related to the gladiators. Mosaics. This is a mosaic. It's a mosaic floor, so it's made like let's say a sort of carpet made with very small, very tiny stones, and this is exactly a scene of gladiators dressed with different shield, weapon, and helmets that represent different civilization, but also you can recognize exotical animals, like it seems a panther, no, or a jaguar. That instead are original helmets that we have found in Pompeii that were used by the gladiators. And in fact, you can also recognize how similar are reproduced in the original mosaic floor. That instead is a photo that shows the director of the excavation of Pompeii, the director of Zanna, that is the director of the excavation at the moment in Pompeii, that is looking at new frescoes. The fresco is a painting, basically, that show gladiators. So it's a scene of gladiators painted on a wall of a house in Pompeii. Last thing that I would like to show you, and then question time, if you have questions, is this fresco that is very, very interesting. Now it's conserved in the National Archaeological Museum of Napoli, and shows the area of Pompeii, the area of the amphitheater. You can see the arena with the gladiators, and these are now all the arches and the steps. This is instead the gymnasium with the swimming pool. That is the swimming pool inside this area. But what is interesting, that on both sides, outside the amphitheater, it seems that there are scenes of fighting. No, there are people that fight each other. What happened? That is frescoes, so paintings that represent a real fact that happened in Pompeii more than 2,000 years ago. So it seems, and we have records about that during a show of gladiators, there was a fight between fans of the city of Pompeii and another city closer to Pompeii called Nuceria. So the citizens of these two cities fight each other again, and for this reason there were a lot of damage in the city for this fight, and for this reason the Roman Senate, so from Rome, they decided to ban the show of gladiators in Pompeii for 10 years. So just to show you that basically also if these people lived 2,000 years ago, basically something is very similar. Now, if we think about some fights that are of the football club fans, now or still nowadays. Okay, so well, now we can back to the map, and if there are questions, I would be happy to try to answer you.
We do have a question about the amphitheater. You said that there were the family names written around the amphitheater?
See, but only the most important family. So let's say like the family of the politicians, of the very wealthy merchants that live in Pompeii. Yes, so are
any of them still present in that area? Can you still see them when you walk up to them?
The description?
Yeah.
Sì, it's possible to see this. Unfortunately, from the videos, the resolution is not so good, so it's not possible to see from the video. But if you walk inside the amphitheater of Pompeii, absolutely, in certain points, you can still see the original inscription with the name carved of the family. Absolutely, yes.
And of those families, are any of them still alive, or is there a way to tell if any of them have
No, that is basically impossible, because of course remember that Pompeii and Romans lived 2,000 years ago. Then it's important to understand that not only for Pompeii, but for all the Roman Empire, after the collapse of the Roman Empire around the 4th century AD, the 5th century, the half of the beginning of the 5th century AD, the old Roman Empire collapsed, and here arrived different barbarian civilization. We call barbarian civilization the civilization that were not like civilized as the Roman, that came in Italy from the north and the east of Europe. Basically, imagine that from that point, Italy will be dominated from a lot of different civilizations. Till the unification of Italy, that is just about 170 years ago. So as a Italy, we can say that it's quite a young nation. And in any case, in 2,000 years, in Italy arrived so different civilizations. So it's such a mix of different people that is absolutely quite impossible.
Even without all that.
Like the roots of people and line from that time.
Yeah, even after all that conquering, it would be pretty hard to just track 2,000 years worth.
Yeah.
There's another question we have about the swimming pool. It was used for exercise or entertainment or any kind of competition. And what did they wear while they were swimming? Did they have swimsuits like we have today?
Okay, so basically, the swimming pool and all the areas located in the gymnasium were used for sports. So that was like a big gym, a gym that was used for the sports, for the younger Romans that practiced the sports. So also the swimming pool was used just for sports. About what the Roman were, for sure, in the swimming pool, there were a sort of not a tunic, but a sort of let's say like we wear today, but yes, something like that. Instead, inside the baths, so the public baths, the thermal baths, they usually were naked.
Very interesting.
But instead,
oh, and one more question. Were there any female, anybody who was female who was allowed to be in the swimming pool back then?
Usually the sports was just for the men. Like a large part of the situation outside the home, the house. Because that was used as a training for the men, the young men, that then they have to become warriors, because in any case, remember that Romans were warriors. Romans had at least 2-3 wars per year, so that
From my understanding, I know gladiators, after winning so many times, they could sometimes get enough money to purchase their own freedom. Is that correct?
Sì, absolutely. They can obtain the freedom, but that is not for just the gladiator. All the slaves in the Roman time can obtain the freedom and become free. Called in Latin liberti. The liberti are the freed slaves that were also very important for the Roman Empire. Because, well, slaves can obtain the freedom after some years of good work, good job, no, with their owner. So the owner then give the freedom, and at that point they can start to be, they can start to have their own business. Okay, so now imagine that the slaves that usually obtained the freedom were slaves that came from owners and family owners that were rich and important. So basically, they also learn how to make business. So usually the freed slaves were also quite, when they start a business, was a very good business. So they earn a lot of money. That was very important also for the Roman Empire, because they can pay a lot of taxes. Okay, so
taxes are very important.
See, taxes to the empire. There they were free, but they have to pay taxes. But also it was important for the freed slaves obtain the freedom. Why? Because their kids, so their sons, become 100% Roman citizen. So that means that some freed slaves donate some of their money to build something for the community, something for the public community, just to try to start to create a dynasty, because the kids of the freed slaves can also vote or be elected.
Oh, that's really interesting. A
Yeah.
very different system from what we've had in our history. I do have one more question.
Okay.
Back to sort of the women's roles. Were they allowed to attend the games back then, or was the competition considered too brutal?
No. Also, slaves and women can assist at the show of gladiators. Because in any case, remember that was propaganda. So propaganda was important for all the different classes. And
if everyone's too hungry, don't worry. You can just send them to the game, and they'll forget about it.
Usually, again, remember that there were different seats. So, for example, remember that the low rows were always used for the most important people. Instead, just going up, there were like the highest seats were the seats of the slaves and also the women.
Yeah, that's a lot of really great questions. But I think if that's all the questions we have for now, I think we can move on.
Okay, so we can now walk a bit on the main street of Pompeii, that is called the Via dell'Abbondanza. That is basically the road that connects Pompeii. Is the longest road of Pompeii and connect Pompeii, the western gate, to the eastern gate. So it's the main street that was say like the commercial street, the shopping street of Pompeii. You can also recognize some fountains that from the Roman time. Some of these fountains are still used. Of course, we changed the pipe because remember that Romans used lead pipe. So that's the part I just would like to stop because it is interesting. So, well, you can see the original road. That is original buildings. Remember that let's say 85% of all the buildings that you can see in Pompeii are original, okay? So that means that all these buildings are about minimum 2,000 years old. You can recognize also the original street built in basalt, that is a volcanic rock. And instead, usually for the walls, they use the tufa rock, the tough rock that is another kind of rock. You can also recognize part of the original fresco decoration, because try to recreate a bit also in your mind that the city of Pompeii was completely decorated. Not the city of Pompeii, but the Roman cities were covered they're completely covered with colors. That instead is the entrance of a house that is beautiful. That is an original stucco. So it's a decoration of the entrance. So it's a crown of that decorate the entrance of this house. That's a plaster cast of a gate of a wooden door that after I will explain to you a bit better. So we can continue our walk in the main street in l'Abbondanza. Remember, these are all entrances of houses and shops. Usually the shops were located in a room of a house, room that was on the street front. So the owner of the shop usually lived behind the shop. And here you can recognize quite well the city, the rocks that the Roman used. But what is interesting, can you see a bit this grass on that side, on the right side of the street, basically? Well, these grasses grow on the top of the layers of the eruption of the 79. So remember what I told you before, that we have excavated only the 60% of the city. So there is another 40% underneath the layers of the eruption. Of course, on top of the layers of the eruption is grow vegetation. So basically all this area here is not excavated yet, but you can also realize how much material would the archaeologists remove to reach the ancient street level. Large part of this material was reused also during the year of excavation. For example, after the World War II, large part of the excavation of the material of the excavation of Pompeii, so like the earth, the rocks, all these stuffs, was used to build the first level of the highway that connects Salerno to Napoli. That just to understand better that basically this is the vegetation. So this area is not excavated yet. This in front of us here in the center is a modern wall that support all part of the material that cover the city. And instead, this one made in bricks and this other one, these are instead original. So for sure, this is another part of Pompeii. This is another part of the roads that is continuing underneath the street, the material of the eruption. Again, also here you can see part of the fresco, but also you can recognize the roof. Well, about the roof, remember that the roofs are not original. The wood is not original. Why? Because imagine that the roof built in wooden beams and clay tiles on top collapsed for the weight of the eruption. So when you see roofs in Pompeii, in wood, are just modern reconstruction to show us how the Romans built the roof. So I would like now to just work another bit, and then I would like to show you a couple of shops. That is interesting. Now look, you can see better the fresco decoration. And here also just the last thing that I would like to show you, that in Pompeii you can also recognize original graffiti that also in that case are used as a propaganda, for political propaganda. So a large part of this inscription that you can find on the facade of houses and shops shows the name of the politician, and so vote Antonio for the next election, basically. Okay, so I would like now to show you a couple of interesting shops that are very famous in Pompeii. The first one is called the Thermopolium, and we can translate as a Roman snack bar. That is one in Pompeii, perfect preserve. Of course, remember the all is original, but not the roof. The wooden beams instead are modern. But all these stuffs are original, and you can recognize these holes. They are basically a huge pot that made in terracotta, in clay, called in Latin dolia, that was used to keep the heat of the hot food. So you have to imagine inside these pot soups of vegetables, soups of cereals, a fish sauce called garum, olives, and other stuff. Remember that Pompeii was a city on the ocean, so here arrive a lot of sailors, a lot of merchants every day, and they usually spend just half day in Pompeii. So they have to eat something very quick during their time in Pompeii. So they arrive, they ask for a cup of wine, a bowl of soup, they pay, eat, drink, and then continues their work on the city. A beautiful fresco, original, still intact and preserved in situ inside this shop, that shows several mythological gods, like this one on the left side is Mercury, that is the god that protects the merchants and the market. On the right side instead, at the end of the right side, we can recognize Mercury, the god of wine, characterized with this animal that is the panther, always connected with Dionysus or Bacchus for the Romans, the god of wine. And in the center, we have the goddess of abundance that is holding the cornucopia, so the horn of plenty. So are all related to the trade, to the market, and so protect the merchant and his commerce. The other shop that I would like to show you instead is the Pistrinum, so a Roman bakery. That is was appearing in Pompeii. So these stones are grinding mills used for grinding the flour, the wheat to obtain the flour, and instead in brick is a vaulted oven. Basically nowadays, after 2000 years in Napoli, we have the same oven for pizza. So again, nothing is really changed in 2000 years. That's a replica, drawing to show you better how work the bakery with the slaves that turn the two rocks, so the contacts of the rocks, grinding the wheat and produce the flour. And you can see also here in the section and also the oven over there. About the Roman food, in Pompeii we have found a lot of frescoes with food, and, fruits, and that shows the different, that's probably where walnuts inside these pots, eggs and birds. So we have a very, thanks for the eruption again, we have a perfect preserved paintings of 2000 years ago that shows the food of the Roman time. But what is impressive in Pompeii, that thanks for the eruption, we can see the carbonized food of 2000 years ago. Like, for example, this is bread. That is bread of the Roman time, olives of 2000 years ago, almonds, mandorla is Italian name, almonds. That is interesting. That is pot, terracotta, and you can recognize the part of eggs of 2000 years ago. So Roman keep the eggs inside like fresh clay to conserve for the winter time. So we have found eggs of the time of the Romans. That instead is the part of garum, also in that case sort of carbonized, petrified, and that the garum is a fish sauce made with different layers of fish and herbs. And that's back to the map. There are questions about this part?
We haven't gotten any questions about the food.
Okay, so now what I would like to show you, well, the area of the thermal baths and the lupanare. Last time we visited the thermal baths, but this time I would like to focus a bit more finely about the lupanare. Was that the lupanare? First, well, we are now working again in Pompeii. We are always on the main street of Pompeii, remember, called the Via dell'Abbondanza. Here you can recognize very well how perfect preserved now is the road, the streets. These are original roads of more than 2000 years ago, probably 2300 years ago, this road. So that is the direction to the forum. I would like just to, there are shops, the entrances of shops. Usually they have like a sort of sliding doors as entrance of shop. Again, that is the entrance of the thermal baths. I would like just to show you the crossroad. Remember, all shops and houses. Because the area, the public areas instead were usually located on the border of the city. So we started from the area of the amphitheater, the gymnasium, and then we would finish in the area of the forum. So that is an interesting intersection because here from the main street there is this narrow road that is called the Via del Lupanare. This street is very famous in Pompeii nowadays, but it was also very famous and popular 2000 years ago. You have to imagine that normally without COVID-19 and in normal season, this street is, there are long queue of visitors that want to see a very small building located at the end of the street. So sometimes people waiting in queuing here for more than 30 minutes. Why so popular this narrow street in Pompeii? Well, I have to explain something using also this reproduction of the ancient city. So this is a kind of model that shows Pompeii, the defensive walls of Pompeii, the Vesuvius, the mountain in the background, but you can recognize that Pompeii was a city with a port, so it was a city on the ocean. So imagine that in Pompeii, every day arrive sailors, merchants. Now, all these sailors, all these merchants arrive in Pompeii. And after long trip in the Mediterranean Sea, they need to relax a bit themselves. So they looked for the lupanari. But what are the lupanari? Well, the lupanari are like brothel, are the Roman brothels, called in Latin lupanari. Now, that road that I showed you before, Via del Lupanare, we can say that is like the red light district of Pompeii. So imagine now the sailors arrive in Pompeii, but now imagine the sailors, because the Roman Empire was big, all the Mediterranean. So in Pompeii arrive also people that didn't speak the language of the city. So they had to, it was complicated to understand where to turn, where to find the direction to the lupanare. For this reason, the Roman decided to create a positive street sign to the direction of the lupanare. So these are some examples or some picture of the street sign that you can see you can find in Pompeii. So that's one of the street sign, like arrow that indicate on the wall, no, where to follow, where the street, the road to the brothel. That is another one instead on the street that shows us to turn left at the next intersection to find the red light district, the lupanare. And in fact, at the end of the street that I show you, that is the lupanare, the famous brothel of Pompeii. Why so popular? Because in Pompeii, the prostitution was absolutely normal in the Roman time. Was legal, was something legal, but normally the brothel were located on the second floor in a small room on the second floor of a shop. In that case, instead, we have found a complete building in 2 stories that was used only as a brothel. So this is the best organized brothel of Pompeii. The second floor is now, it was restored in the recent year because of course collapsed with the eruption. But what is interesting that in each floor there are 5 rooms, and in each room there is a bed, a stone bed. We can see that inside with a stone bed that was covered with a woolen or a straw mattress. What is funny and interesting is that on the wall covered with fresco, so with white painting, the archaeologists have found a lot of graffiti, of inscription. So when they arrived here, they started to translate the graffiti inside this room, and then they realized that that was a kind of, let's say, trip advisor of the Roman time, a kind of Yelp, no, of that time. But what is the most famous things about this building? That inside this building we have found some original frescoes. Frescoes that, let's say, that show us a sort of menu of this place. Frescoes of paintings located on top the entrances of the different rooms. And I show you a couple of examples of these original frescoes that you can see in the lupanare of Pompeii. So again, we can say that nothing is really changed, no, over 2000 years. So we can now back on the map. And Alex, I don't know if there are questions or something about the areas that we have explored.
We have a few interesting comments.
Okay.
But we did have a question about how big was the bed that they have in the room?
No, well, basically very small, but very small because they were small. Remember that Romans were absolutely smaller respect nowadays. Yeah? The average was about the average was about in meter is a meter and 50, 55 for men, a meter and 40, 45 for women. So I think that in feet are about
around 5 feet or so.
Around 5 feet. So quite small people. So they were absolutely they were smaller than us. So also the bed and were smaller. Yeah.
We have another question. This is a very good one. Were all the brothel employees, were they all female, or were there also male guests?
Basically both male and female, and usually were slaves. In that case also were usually slaves, and so the prostitution was legal, but in general the prostitutes were slaves.
I remember coming to Pompeii many years ago and actually going into the Lupanare, and I just thought it was so interesting. It was probably one of the most modern places. Like you said, it's like a Yelp or TripAdvisor review system on the wall. But there was also a menu.
Well, for sure, it's one of the funny things that I would like just to show some videos.
Yeah.
Absolutely is one of the funniest things that is possible to see in Pompeii. Also, now discovered all the street sign. Well, another thing that is interesting is that in the Archaeological Museum of Napoli, I told you that we have the most important stuff at the Archaeological Museum of Naples. In the Archaeological Museum, we have a section of the museum that is called the secret section. The secret section. And inside this section, there are all the frescoes, the mosaics, and the artifacts that the archaeologists have found in the 25 lupanari of Pompeii.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, that's
so I would like just what?
It's so many. We do have one more question.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Could the customers, could they be female? The people who came in to get services.
The customer. That probably not. But also in that case, we have to think about, because for sure there were also females, no, that had like prostitution slaves. But in that case, were very rich women. And in that case, remember that rich men and rich women usually have their slaves at home.
Oh, they had
so
their.
they didn't need, yes, exactly, to move outside to do that. Yeah. Okay. And what is just from here, I would like to show you, because we are in the forum, and we can see in the background the shape of the Mount Vesuvius. How is nowadays the Vesuvius? I don't know if you remember when I show you the picture of Pompeii, how was Pompeii now on the shore, on the ocean. That was just one mountain. Instead, nowadays, we have two peaks of the Vesuvius that in the Roman time were linked in one huge mountain. Linked one huge mountain that was more high than now, was about 2,000 meters. So basically it was 2 times the height of today. So imagine that on the 79 AD, there was a huge columns of ash that started from the top of the Vesuvius and blow up. All the half of mountains blow off, and the columns of ash went up into the sky for about 22 miles up. So that is an incredible amount of ash that basically created an enormous cloud on the sky. So it was early morning, but became like a night, because all was completely become dark. The sun was covered, the sky was covered, and after 6-7 hours, the huge cloud of ash fell down and buried everything and killed also some people. That is why we have also the example of the plaster cast of people that died during the eruption. That is like a picture of the eruption with the avalanche of ash that buried completely the city. And thanks for Giuseppe Fiorelli, that was the archaeologist, the director of Pompeii at the end of the 18th century, that we have the technique of the plaster cast, because inside the ash that solidified, the decomposition of the organic material left a hole that was filled by Giuseppe Fiorelli with liquid plaster, and we have the shape. Is possible to see, probably this is the most incredible thing in Pompeii, that in Pompeii it's possible to see the plaster cast of the victims, of the people that died 2000 years ago. That is very famous also. That seems praying, but instead this man, he is trying to protect himself, the nose, the mouth, with his hands. And we have not only human that died, but also animals. That is the famous dog, where you can also recognize the track of the collar on the neck, because it was chained and was impossible to run away, to escape. Or in the recent excavation, we have found also we obtained the plaster cast of a horse. That's the plaster cast of a horse. But remember that we can obtain the plaster cast of all the organic material, like that's the plaster cast of a wooden door of 2000 years ago. And also the plaster cast of the roots of trees, that with the help nowadays of botanic and biologists permit us to recreate the landscape of 2000 years ago. And we're finished from where we start, from the beginning. So next to the amphitheater, we have a vineyard. We create this vineyard studying the plaster cast of the roots of the trees that we have found in this garden. So we recreate exactly the same kind of vineyard, of landscape of 2000 years ago, with the same distances between grapes, like in the Roman time. And there are about more or less now 20 years that we make wine in Pompeii. And well, that's it. That is just a video with an overview of the size of part of the area that we are visiting, with the amphitheater and the gymnasium. Also in that case, you can see inside the Palestra Grande in Italian, you can see the swimming pool and then the amphitheater that we visit. And then the main street, this is the vineyard from the top. That's it, the vineyard. And that is the main street that connect the eastern gate to the western gate at the end, where there is the forum, basically. Yeah.
We do have a question. Do we know anyone who was able to escape during the disaster?
Absolutely, for sure, some people escape because the archaeologist, and also with the help of the volcanologist, they studied a bit the eruption. So probably only the people that escaped in the first 2-3 hours survived. The other that instead decide to remain in Pompeii or just next to Pompeii, for sure they died. But who escaped in the first hours of the eruption survived. What it is important to remember, to know, basically, is that the Romans didn't know that the Vesuvius was a volcano. So the Romans used the slope of the Vesuvius for vineyard, to produce wine. So basically, for the Roman, was a sort of big surprise, the eruption.
Did one of the Pliny, I know either Pliny the Elder or Pliny the Younger, he wrote about the eruption, is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. We have records about the eruption, and the most important records is the records of Pliny the Younger. Pliny the Younger, that was in Baia, was located in Baia. That was another city of the Bay of Naples, located in the northern side of the Vesuvius. Remember that the Vesuvius, the ash came from the southern side to the southern side. So sorry, the wind came from the north side. So the ash just covered the city located in the southern side. That is a view of the Forum and the Vesuvius in the background. So imagine that we are in the southern side, respect the Vesuvius. So basically all the city located in the southern side were completely buried and destroyed. Instead, the city located in the northern side of the Vesuvius survived. And in one of these cities, there was this Roman writer called Pliny the Younger, that he saw the eruption from this safe place, and he wrote a couple of letters with the description of the eruption. And he sent these letters to Tacitus, another Roman historiographer, and it's for this reason that we have the records of the eruption, basically.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is Vesuvius, is it still considered an active volcano?
Absolutely, see. I think that is in the top 5 of the most dangerous volcano in the world.
Goodness, there's so many people there.
Yeah, at the moment, the last eruption was in the 1944 during the World War II. And in fact, there were the Allies, the Americans, that took a lot of pictures from the fight. So we have an important documentation of the last eruption. But yes, it is one of the most dangerous nowadays because at the moment in the red zone around the Vesuvius, we more or less about 1 million people. So it could be very complicated to actuate the evacuation plan in case of an eruption. Yeah.
Right, and I know Etna is also another.
Didn't learn about the history.
Right. You know, it's funny. I know we're running over a little bit of time here, but I wanted to mention, after the last time we had this, wonderful tour, I was reading up on Pompeii, and I heard that there was a discovery of a man who was trying to run away, and then he was hit
was hit by a stone.
I'll put it in the group chat. There's a couple pictures that I
see. That's from the last excavation of maximum 1 year and a half. 2 years. Yeah.
Wow. So it's just so interesting that we're continuing to discover. And this poor guy, he's just trying to run away.
See, but that is interesting in Pompeii, that really is a picture, is a photograph of that instant of life of the 70. That was the 79. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I don't know if anyone has any other questions in the chat, or we can even open it up to microphones now if anyone has any more questions. But thank you so much, Roberto, for joining us again and telling us a little bit more about.
No, really. I hope that you enjoyed also these other few parts that we saw together today, like the amphitheater and the Lupanare.
Yeah. Oh, and of course, I know a lot of folks would love to send you a little bit of love. So if you have, I will post your PayPal link in the group chat so that everyone can, if you would like to send Roberto a little thank you for this. And we also had you interviewed on our podcast recently. So if anyone is interested in hearing that, it's our podcast called Haunted Texas and Beyond, and this is definitely considered part of the beyond of our talks. But again, thank you so much for joining us. I'll go ahead.
No, it was my pleasure.
Yeah. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Oh, we've got some thank yous. I know CDI, we had some interesting talks in the group chat during.
See? No, if you have other questions, absolutely.
Yeah, if anyone has any, oh, there we go. I unmuted all the mics now. So if you have any questions.
Where are you going to put his PayPal?
I'll put it in the group chat. So,
okay.
Yeah. Let me.
So would you, since our last, this is Jeanine, since our last podcast, I have learned as well new things. Would you be interested in doing an interview again? And
Roberto, would you be interested in doing another interview with us or another tour of southern Italy somewhere?
Sì, so we can organize. I have just to create a bit the slideshow, but we can do maybe in a couple of weeks.
Okay. Somebody just said, can we see other places in southern Italy besides Pompeii? So when you join us again in 2 weeks, if you should choose to, where would you like for us to see in your world?
But if you like always about a bit the archaeological side, maybe archaeological sites, I can create like well, Herculaneum also. Yeah, if you like, I can read now. Yes, the chat Herculaneum. Or well, we can do. Why not?
Why not?
Herculaneum basically is the same history as a Pompeii, but there are some interesting things that are completely different respect Pompeii. And yes, yeah, we can absolutely. We can.
All right. Now we have a topic.
Set the slideshow, and we can do, yeah, absolutely.
I know there's so many interesting spots, places just around that area. I know there's Positano and Salerno and Capri. There's
Capri, but there are a lot of places here. Now Pisa is a bit far from my region because it's in Tuscany. But again, Herculaneum, of course. Also, if you want Paestum, Poseidonia, there is another beautiful archaeological site with some of the best preserved Greek temples in the Mediterranean, and maybe Amalfi Coast. Well, about the Etruscans. Etruscan, well, here we have something, but maybe just above could be like a focus, because remember that the Etruscans were also here in the South Italy. So Pompeii, Herculaneum, but also before the Romans, there were also the Etruscans here in the South Italy. So we have something.
Yeah, I know I know a lot of people around the world know so much about the Romans because of how far they've gone, but we don't hear too often about the Etruscans.
But for sure are less famous than the Romans, because of course Greeks and Romans now Greeks they spread, like the sort of democracy and organization philosophy, and then the Romans basically spread these stuffs all around the Mediterranean and more, and all Europe, North Africa, and Asia a bit too. Etruscan was a local civilization, Italic civilization, located mostly the most beautiful sites of Etruscan are for sure in on the border of Tuscany and Lazio. That is the region of Rome.
I've been able to see they have an Etruscan museum in Rome, and it's very quiet because it's not visited very often, but has so much interesting artwork and archaeological items. Yeah. There's even an actual tomb that you can walk into. It's very interesting. There's a lot of energy when you walk in.
Roberto, I visited Pompeii. Oh, good Lord. I was 19 or so, I think. And one of the things that really struck me and that I carry with me in my memory some 50 years later was going into the marketplace and seeing all the fountains, and actually where handprints had been worn away from people leaning on those fountains to have a drink, and putting my hand there just gave me a connection with these people that you rarely get in other tours or other civilizations. So that was important. And
see, that is something that, of course, you can absolutely feel when you are in seat, when you are in Pompeii for real. And so you can also touch and see where, for example, that is very interesting, yes, about the fountains, that there is a shape basically where thousands and thousands of hands carved and smoothed.
The graffiti too.
One of the other part of the fountain, yeah.
The graffiti in some places, some of it is very dirty, but then there's other places where they say, "This is where me and my best friend meet every single day." Or sometimes they'll say, "For a good time, call so and so's mom." Yeah. But it's so funny because I think it's the same graffiti that we sometimes create today. It's been around forever.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's it from us for today. Again, thank you, Roberto, so much, and
it was my pleasure.
And hopefully we'll see you again. Thanks everybody for coming out.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Bye. Bye. Grazie.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.